Hello, I'm Francis Jean-Philippe, and I am the cyber threat analyst for Fortune 404. And this week we wanted to walk you through the identify function of the NIST framework. So with the identify function, we will look at five different components, and they are asset management, business environment, governance, risk assessment, and risk management strategy. So with asset management, the idea behind it is that before we can protect anything, we have to find out what exactly we're protecting. So we keep an inventory of all of the assets that we have, either major or minor assets, and we set a priority on them based on their criticality, as well as what function they have in the business. So these assets may include devices, systems, personnel, data facilities that we have around the world, as well as third-party vendors. So we want to make sure that we set out good agreements, security agreements between our third parties, as well as our employees, based on how to have access to these assets that we have to manage. And so the next part is business environment. And it's basically identifying where we are in the ecosystem, which means that we need to identify what our objectives are as a e-trading company, as well as how to communicate to stakeholders in case of emergencies, and clearly laying out our business goals. The third part is governance. And with governance, we need to provide a structure, internal structure, on how we will approach insider threat mitigation. So some of these may include having a three-line of defense, where in the first line we have our developers and security developers and network administrators. And with the second line of defense, we have people who are doing risk management, who are assessing how the developers as well as the other people in the first line of defense are holding on to their roles. And in the third line of defense, we have auditing, where either internal or external audits are capable of determining how well the first two lines of defense are doing their roles. So with governance, it's important to kind of separate the different roles so that no one person is auditing themselves, because they might introduce some bias and they may not be able to evaluate their own success. And so with risk assessment, so we will identify what risks are associated with some of the assets that we've listed. So some risks may be if someone gets access to the e-trading system, what would happen and how can we mitigate access to it? So one of the ideas would be, for example, to make sure that only the right people have access to our most critical infrastructures. And we need to determine a way to have that access control. And so once we've mapped out that access control, then we can apply it in the protect function. And risk management strategy will deal mainly with identifying behaviors that are sort of like people who are at risk of being insiders. So we have a strategy of determining network activity based on how is someone interacting with the network, and if they develop a certain pattern that fits into what an insider threat may have. So a lot of it will be dealing with behavioral analysis, and as well as legal procedures, establishing legal procedures. We need to communicate with our legal department to make sure that proper guidelines are specified in any document that we signed with employees. And we need to also outline what will happen if an employee is found violating a certain access rights, or if they're violating a certain company policy. So we think that all of these things taken together will allow us to have a good evaluation on identifying the critical functions of some assets, as well as establishing how we go about in doing governance and compliance with these assets.